Hi! A few weeks ago, I made a video in which I revealed, for lack of a less dramatic word, that I have OCD. And immediately following the publication of that video, I embarked on a 6-week course of OCD therapy. Those weeks have absolutely flown by, and now I am done. But am I cured? No. Do I feel better? Yes. Can you cure OCD? I don't know. Was the therapy worth it? Yes, definitely. Will I continue with OCD therapy? Probably, though it is expensive. All therapy is very expensive. So the goal of this video is to hopefully help and support people who have OCD or have people in their life with OCD or who are just curious about what OCD is, how it works, and how it can be supported and controlled through therapy. OCD is a It is a horrible thing that I have been living with for possibly my entire life, and I was just never diagnosed with it because so often we misunderstand what it is. But after doing my own research, I went and got myself a therapist, and through therapy, I have gotten a handle on my OCD. But what does that mean exactly, to have a handle on your OCD? Well, through 6 weeks of OCD therapy, a lot of ideas and tools and coping mechanisms were thrown at me. And over the course of these 6 weeks, I have done my best to implement them as best I can. But I'm pretty sure that I'm going to need to go back to therapy to kind of continue reinforcing the things that I have learned. And what are those things? What do you learn in OCD therapy that might give you a way to cope and live an ordinary life even with OCD? Well, in order to do that, I think I need to give you some examples of how my OCD works. If you watched my previous video opening up about having OCD, then you'll recognize some of this stuff. And as I said in that video, one of the common misconceptions about OCD is that it's just tied to cleanliness and tidiness. Like, my partner recently got a new job around the time of my diagnosis. And I'm not joking, they came home one day and said, "My God, all of my colleagues in the office keep saying things like, oh, I'm so OCD about my desk, I've got to keep it nice and tidy. Oh, everyone's got a bit of OCD. OCD is a spectrum and we're all on it. So is autism. It's a spectrum and we're all on it." No, you're not, Karen. That's not how it works. Autism is a spectrum that some people are on if they have autism. It is a spectrum of autism, not a spectrum of every person with every brain. That's not what it means. And the same is true with OCD. There is a spectrum of disorders and symptoms that some people have and other people have different ones and blah, blah, blah. It's a spectrum for people who have OCD. It is a clinical, diagnosable disorder. And I have it. And you don't, Karen. You just don't. Now, the way that my therapist explained it is that OCD does kind of act like a voice in your head. And broadly speaking, there are two types of people who have OCD. There are people who cannot trust themselves and people who don't trust others. I am the former. I have no faith in myself to do something right. Now, this spreads out way beyond OCD into other elements of my life, but as it pertains to OCD, what this means is something like, after having left my house 5 minutes ago, I will suddenly be hit with this thought, and this is the OCD voice in my head saying, "Did you lock the door when you left?" As my therapist explained to me, you probably are not going to remember if you locked the door. And that's because our brains don't file away every single thing we ever do. The things that we do every day, the things that are part of our rituals and our routine, they just disappear as soon as you've done them. You don't hold on to them because they're ordinary. They're uninteresting. But the OCD voice will pop up in my head and say, "Did you lock the door?" I don't know. And what happens then, and again, this is what my therapist explained to me, is you get into the trap of conversing with that voice. You will say to yourself, "Gee, I don't know if I locked the door. I suppose it's possible that I didn't." And the OCD voice says, "Well, you better go check then." And you go, "Okay, off I go, back I go." And in the worst case scenario, you can invent a memory or just imagine that your door is swinging open right now. Your cat has escaped and there's a fire and a burglar. All of these things are happening right now to you. This stems from the fact that I have no faith in myself to do something as simple as lock the door. And paired with that is something else that a lot of people with OCD suffer, which is this kind of bias where you assume that it's more likely that something terrible will happen to you as opposed to anyone else. It's kind of a really pathetic and sad version of main character syndrome. People with main character syndrome think that they are the central star of every story. OCD is kind of the dark version of that, where you assume that bad things are just more likely to happen to you. And so the voice appears in my head to ask me if I locked the door. I doubt if I locked it, because I can't trust myself that I actually did something responsible. And then I also start to panic that there's a burglar in there right now and also a fire, because within the 5 minutes since I left the house, it's perfectly reasonable in my mind that something like that could happen to me. I don't believe in God, I don't believe in fate, and yet for some reason I just believe that things are more likely to happen to me. I am more likely to get certain illnesses. I am more likely to poison my own food by accident. I am more likely to leave my door open. And so in order to tackle all of these things, we need to understand them, and that's what the process of therapy does. Now, the first step in tackling all of this OCD voice in your head, is knowing what to do when the voice appears, when it rears its ugly head. And I told my therapist what I usually do, which is bad. It's what most people do. It's what seems logical and seems like the good idea, but it's not. And this is what it is. I try to silence the OCD voice through rational conversation with it. The OCD voice says, maybe instead of milk, you accidentally put bleach in your coffee earlier. This is a genuine thought that went through my head just a few days ago. I made myself a cup of coffee, I sat down, and as I was drinking it, I thought, does this taste a little bit off? Now that's the OCD voice saying that. It tasted fine because it was fine. But the OCD voice says, yeah, this tastes kind of funny. Maybe that's because instead of going into the fridge to get the oat milk, you went under the sink and got out the bleach and put that in instead. It is not reasonable. As I say this to you, if you don't have OCD, you're probably thinking, wow, that's insane, you're crazy. But that's how it works. Now, here's what most people do. This is what I've been doing for so long, and it's the wrong thing to do. You engage in conversation with the voice and try to use rationale to make it shut up and go away. So in that moment where you wonder if you accidentally put bleach in your coffee and now you've sipped at it and maybe you've got bleach pouring through your system. In that moment, as you're panicking and imagining this as a real scenario, you say to the OCD voice, there's no way that I would have done that. Because the bleach is under the sink and the milk is in the fridge, and I'm not going to get those two things confused. And the OCD voice will say something like, yeah, but you did this at 7 a.m. You were half asleep. You often do silly things when you're half asleep and you just stumble into the kitchen for your first cup of coffee. Maybe you just weren't fully aware of it. And then I say to the voice, well, no, because I have muscle memory. I pour the kettle with one hand and I reach for the fridge with the other. This is just how it always works. And then the OCD voice says, yeah, but don't you remember that yesterday you cleaned the kitchen and you used bleach? And the bleach was actually left out on the side. It wasn't under the sink at all. At which point I go and check. Where is the bleach? Yeah, it's under the sink. Okay. Well, then it must be fine, right? And at that point, you are too far in. The OCD voice always has a retort. There is always a reason for it to make you doubt yourself. You can never 100% say with certainty that you didn't do something stupid, like put bleach in your coffee or forget to lock the door. But that's what most of us do. We engage in conversation with the OCD voice. Now, something I really liked about my therapist is that we both opened up about our hobbies and interests in order to kind of form a bond. We both like video games and fantasy novels, etc. So great, we could talk about those things. And then by the third or fourth session, he took a risk and brought up politics. He said to me, I'm pretty sure it's safe to say that you're not a right-wing person. And I was like, okay, where are you going with this? And he said something that I really liked. He had a metaphor for OCD that I thought really, really worked. If you're a British person, this will make sense to you. In the UK, we have a politician called Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage is the person behind Brexit. He is the reason that Brexit happened. For years leading up to Brexit, he was the head of a fringe political party whose entire manifesto was just to get the UK out of the European Union. And even though this was a very fringe group, the UK media kept putting him in newspaper articles and on TV and paying attention to him. Nigel Farage kept appearing in the media, to the point that our Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, got scared. He was worried that everyone in the country wanted Brexit to happen. And so he said, okay, let's have a referendum. Let's have the people vote. Do they want to leave the EU? And we did. By a tiny margin. Because in the lead up to that referendum, money was poured into the Leave campaign and loads of propaganda was thrown about in order to convince people who'd never even thought about leaving the EU that suddenly it was a really good opportunity. Now, Nigel Farage is back in our papers again, and his current party, Reform UK, are gaining a lot of traction in the polls and in the media and blah blah blah. Because he keeps getting platformed. Because he's an exciting topic. And the news media knows that if it pays attention to Nigel Farage, or maybe they're being paid to, I don't know, if they pay attention to him, everyone will debate Nigel Farage and what he stands for. He will make some people excited and other people angry, and that sells newspapers. It's all very obvious. I've never talked about him on this channel, I never thought I would, but here we are. My therapist said to me that the OCD voice in your head is kind of like Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage pops up in your head and tells you that you put bleach in your coffee or you didn't lock the door when you left. And what does so many of us do when we're on Twitter? Well, not anymore, but, you know, rip in peace Twitter. When we're on social media and we end up somehow getting involved in a comment section argument with someone who supports Nigel Farage or Donald Trump or one of those people. What do so many of us do? We take the bait and we bite and we engage. We get fired up, we get upset, we get angry, we get emotional, and we're giving them exactly what they want. The OCD voice is exactly that. As a YouTuber, the best way to deal with people who come into my comment section and say inflammatory things is to either ignore the comment, delete the comment, or even block that person so they can't comment again on my channel. I have that control. Sometimes I engage with them because I think it might be fun, silly, entertaining, or because I want to defend myself or defend my community, whatever. It's never a good idea. And I've learned that very, very slowly over the last 10 years. But we still sometimes slip up and just something gets to you and you feel the need to bite back. Once again, that is the OCD voice. It pops up in your head and it says something inflammatory, it says something to annoy you, and you feel the need to reply, to engage with it, to argue with it, to use realistic reasoning and facts and logic and common sense to get it to shut up. And all it does is get louder and more obnoxious and maybe even more dangerous. That is OCD. That is a right-wing commenter. That is Nigel Farage. It works so well as a metaphor. And the place you have to get to, the place that I've been training myself to get to through all these weeks of therapy, is a place of shutting out the voice. My therapist used to have OCD. He had it for years. And that's part of the reason that he specializes in OCD as a therapist, because he's gone through it all. And I really appreciate that. And he said that the voice still comes up. You can still have this voice. No matter how long you've had OCD for, how long you've been in therapy for, how long you've felt in control again for, it doesn't matter. The voice can still pop up. And when it does, you push it away. You don't look at it, you don't engage with it, you ignore it. And my first step, and I'm still kind of working through this first step, is bravado. This is what I've found really works for me, is puffing up my chest, standing tall, and saying no. So for example, I leave the house. I'm walking down the street, and the voice comes up and it says, "Did you lock the door?" And I stand tall and I puff out my chest and I say, "I locked the door." Anyway, and then I go about my day. I turn my music up, I look up at the blue sky, I sniff the air, and I go, "I locked the door." And I move on, and the voice goes away. And I told my therapist this with a lot of pride. I thought, yeah, confidence. Because OCD, as I said, does come from a lack of confidence and trust in yourself. People with OCD can't trust their own senses. They can't trust their memories. They can't trust their own actions. They cannot trust that they locked the door. They cannot trust that they didn't put bleach in their coffee. It's a lack of faith and trust in your mind and your body. And so I took everything that he had been teaching me and I went away and I developed a kind of bravado. I don't want to say confidence because It's not real. I don't fully believe it. It's bravado. It's a shield that I'm putting up. So instead of genuinely feeling confident that I locked the door, I have to dramatically puff up my chest and say, yes, I locked the door. I'm strong. I'm confident. I have to tell myself these things. And I thought that this was a great first step, and he said that it is. But the problem with that, which I'm still working through now because this is a long process, the problem with that is that you become reliant on the act of bravado as a kind of ritual. And that's the thing. A lot of people with OCD have rituals to deal with those thoughts. A thought will spiral and spiral in your head over and over again for minutes, hours, days. It just keeps going. So again, the locked door thing. I could leave the house, and if I don't go back and check, that will continue to just spin around in my head. I could be out of the house for 5 hours, and I will have very little time in that 5 hours to think about anything except, did you lock the door? No, you didn't lock the door. There are burglars in the house is on fire, the cat got away, there's a fire engine outside, police have pulled up, blah, blah, blah. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And a lot of people, in order to deal with that and to break that cycle, they come up with rituals. And so puffing up my chest and standing tall, all of that is a ritual in order to deal with the OCD. And he said it's a great first step. You come up with a way of dealing with it and pushing the voice out. You're not engaging with the voice in ridiculous, pointless conversation that's only going to make it worse. So that's a great step. But you need to get to a point where you don't even need to do that. Where the voice comes up and you go no. And you firmly believe in the no. You firmly believe that you don't even need to hear it finish its sentence. Did I? No. But what if? No. So much OCD starts with the words, what if? What if this happened? What if I forgot to do this? What if I put bleach in my coffee? It goes on and on and on. And you have to get to a point where you just say, what if? No. What if? No. And you deflect it and it's gone and it stays gone. And it starts with these rituals as a way to cope. And gradually you push it away further and further and further. So I am not cured of OCD. I still have these thoughts all the time. I'm going to get better. I'm going to continue progressing and improving over time. But it will take a lot of time. And it'll take time for you as well. But OCD is a voice in your head. And the more attention you pay it, the worse it gets. So the goal is to ignore the voice, and eventually it will become entirely silent. Just like Nigel Farage. Let's see how we go. Subscribe for books.